Thank you, thank you. I think you got the most complicated names in one panel. So my name is Karolis, and I lead Google Play Start on Android program, which is designed to help startups launch their apps on mobile and help them succeed through acquiring beta testers, getting UI, UX feedback, getting featured on the Play Store, things like that. And this year we thought we had this incredible experience working with Socratic, who was part of the program, and we thought, what better way to highlight somebody who's done something incredible than an app that became best app of 2017 in just 1 year, from launching on Google Play to the honors at the end of the year. So Shreyans, who's the co-founder of Socratic, maybe give a quick intro what Socratic is.
It's an app for high school kids where you can take a picture of a homework question and we instantly teach you how to answer it. It's also used by middle school and college students, but high school is the focus. Our goal is to give every student an AI-powered tutor that's free and always available. And we work best in math and science. Those are our focuses. But you can also use this in history, English, pretty much everything at the high school level. That's what we do.
Nice. And this is not your first startup, right? Before this, you were the first employee of Venmo and
that's right.
VP of engineering there as well. Do you want to kind of talk a bit about how that experience translated into Socratic?
Sure. So first of all, how I got there was one of the big lessons in my life is, I guess, always follow and chase after interesting people. So I went to a college where pretty much everyone wanted to go to business school, and very few people wanted to make something interesting or believe that that was even possible. But there were two guys I knew from freshman year of school that did believe that. And they were always trying some little thing. And they were like by far the most interesting and inspired people that I knew. And we ended up becoming really good friends. And a few years after college, I got money from one of them on my phone. I got a text that said, "You just received $1 from someone." And I was like, well, this is pretty cool. I went and spoke with them, and it was these two guys who were starting to build Venmo. And somehow it had been obvious for a while that they were the ones who would end up doing something interesting. So that was a huge lesson. So I joined them as the first employee. I was there for 3 years from the beginning, basically, until we got acquired. And learned a bunch of things in that process. And I guess the biggest one was that I could actually do something, which was not obvious before that. I didn't really know how to program when I joined. And basically learned everything about startups there in those 3 years. Then at some point, I decided I wanted to use this skill I had just acquired for something I cared a lot about. I grew up in Indonesia, always surrounded by poverty, always pretty aware that I had gotten very lucky to have a good education. It made a big difference in my life. And it felt like we're approaching this time where technology could do some really cool things in education, but nothing had happened yet in the space that I was interested in. That's how I got into it.
Nice. And was it, for you, the biggest motivation was education as a sector, or was it more, using AI for something?
Yeah, there were two broad motivations. One of them was very much education, and this idea of having access to it feels pretty just, or not having access to it just because you were born in a certain family feels quite unjust. So that was a huge motivation. I knew from pretty early on that I didn't know anything about education. What I did know was how to make something on the internet. And I also knew that I didn't really want to have a boss. I wanted to be very much in control of the environment that I was working in. The first few years of Venmo were the most fun I had ever had. Just a few people making something that we believed in. So I really wanted to do that again, but then do it in a space where I felt there was a big opportunity, and it was something that I'd be really proud to put out into the world. And the way I felt about Socratic for a while is, at some point, it may fail. And even if it does, it won't matter, because what we've done so far has been really great. We've put interesting ideas out in the world. So it's fun to work in a space where it feels like there's almost no risk. Anything could happen, and would still be really fun and very, very valuable. Nice.
And obviously education is a big topic here in the US as well. And how did you guys decide sort of what's that first bite into education? Because obviously it's very broad, and there's lots of talk about personalization and different issues that we're having in public and charter schools and things like that. What's the first sort of bite and area you decided to focus on? Why?
Yeah, so my co-founder was previously at Google for 5 years, and he brought a certain lens with him, which is he knew that a lot of people are going out onto the internet and looking for help. And we started exploring that space, and we found that what they would find would largely be either really old content, either too specific and lacking any kind of depth, like you'd find an answer on Yahoo Answers, or you could find, if you wanted, like a textbook chapter. But finding the right thing that's going to help you learn how to answer that question was pretty hard. So we knew from the beginning that there's this huge demand. It's pretty universal. Like everyone in the world goes to Google to look for help. And the results were universally underwhelming. So we knew that this was this big problem that we could tackle. We started with like this Q&A community that's still around, still does really well, but a few years in, realized that wasn't the main way it was going to work out. Like it was not on the phone, and there were like a bunch of reasons why you wouldn't want to use that on your phone. That's the main computer pretty much everyone in the world has. At some point, we also realized that AI, like computer vision, and being able to understand what a sentence is talking about, were like these things that were starting to appear, and were just really powerful tools that would help us build something much closer to a tutor. Like who'd sit by you and look at your question and be like, okay, this is what you're really wondering about. Let me teach you that, as opposed to like finding the closest match, which is what Google's really good at.
Yeah, that's great. And were there ever any concerns, because obviously the app is almost magical, it gives you an answer to whatever problem you have in specific fields. Mm-hmm. Was there any concern about educators perceiving that as cheating?
Yes, there was a lot of fear of that. And we have these, yeah, that's a complicated question. Yes, it is used for cheating, for sure. But we have this very strong belief that if you want people to do something, you have to make it easy for them to do it. And what we want is for people to learn. And when you're trying to go out on the internet and learn something, there's a bunch of challenges you face. Like you have this question in front of you. If you missed class, you may not know what concept it's talking about. There may be a specific word in there that you don't understand. There's like many places where you're like, there might be a gap in your knowledge, and you might not be aware of it. So what a good tutor would do is try to understand what this question is really talking about and try to teach you that. That's really hard to find. So we've always felt pretty comfortable that if we help you get to the thing that you're really trying to learn, we give you a really good lesson that makes it easy for you to learn, a lot of people who may have otherwise chosen to not do their work or to copy an answer are now going to learn that I can learn this with a good tool, and they're going to end up learning it. So that's one big idea in our heads about this, the cheating angle, which is make it easy for people to learn and more people will learn. The other idea is, I feel like a lot of education is a bit of an inequality issue, where if you can afford a tutor, you're going to get one. Tutors are exceptionally helpful, and that's almost never seen as cheating. But if you get help from a classmate, that's seen very differently, or if you get help from the internet, that's seen very differently. And I feel like there is a bit of injustice there. And so to some extent, it may be seen as cheating, but that's okay, because we want more people to have access to this high-quality learning. And ultimately, what matters to us is, do students learn? Do they keep using it? And yeah, so we feel pretty good that despite the fact that it does get used for cheating, a lot of people do end up learning, and that's the thing we care more about. There's always a trade-off.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
What trade-off are we willing to make? And we are willing to make that.
It feels like almost tricking people into learning, right?
Right, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Going back to the app itself, you guys launched it on iOS in late 2016, on Android in early 2017. What were those early challenges in the early days of launching the app?
Yeah, we're trying to attack a really massive problem, which, I mean, even if you just narrow it down to high school kids looking for help, everywhere in the world, there's different subjects they're taking slightly. They get different kinds of questions. A math equation is very different from a history question or a balancing chemical equations question. Just covering that breadth of knowledge is really hard. Providing a good experience in each of those subjects is really hard. So a huge challenge was, what do we focus on? Initially, we just did sciences, and then the question was like, how do we explain that to people? Like, oh, you can use this for chemistry, but only half of biology. You can't use it for this other thing that you're also taking that day. It felt like pretty complicated to try to narrow it down. So we decided early that we would try to do a bunch of these subjects, which was very hard, not necessarily the right choice. So that was a huge challenge. Another challenge is now that we've decided we're going to try to do this in every subject, we have to understand each of those subjects pretty well. Like building a math solver that'll solve an equation is very different, requires very different skills than the natural language processing required to do a history question. And so we have a team of 10 people, and 6 of us are engineers, including me. So it's a very small team trying to tackle a really big problem. Picking our focus was very hard. And then making sure the quality is good and constantly improving, that's another huge challenge.
Yeah, and I'm assuming launch timing is critical too, right? Because you have to kind of
Yeah,
map to school years and,
yeah.
and sessions and
Like
semesters.
September is like
Yeah.
the biggest time of year for us. It means like this summer is super busy because we're getting ready for launch.
Yeah.
Another thing that we've struggled with is we're a bunch of product and technology people, and we had historically undervalued marketing or not really understood marketing. So just like now that we have this moment in a year, that matters a lot, and we have to like adjust what our team is good at. We have to build that skill, and it becomes really important to do that. That's been a challenge.
Yeah, makes sense. In terms of testing the product, how soon, sort of before the public sees it, do you start testing it? And then once you launch an open beta, how long does that last? And what does the process look like? What tools do you use?
Yeah. So we do a bunch of things to learn. We're not high school students. We haven't been for a long time, so it's really hard to know what they need or how they see a product or like understand it. So a thing we've done always is we focus a lot on user testing. We have high school kids who haven't used our product in our office every week. So we've built this whole like system to get new students into the office so they can play with the app. That's a big thing we do from the design stages. We do a lot of like prototypes that are like in InDesign or something, so kids can play with it. That's a big part of it. We try to put out product very quickly, so we'll have like a few weeks of design and testing, and then a few weeks of building, and we try to put out a small thing so we can start learning from it in the wild. We do a lot of like release to 10% of our audience, or release to a specific country so we can have a group of people using it. Of course, Android early access was a huge part of being able to launch on Android. I don't know if you guys are familiar. It's like kind of like a risk-free way to put an app out where the reviews you get don't get counted towards your score, and you can have a conversation with the people leaving your reviews, so you can get really good feedback from real users without any long-term cost. So we did that for a month before we launched our Android app. It was super helpful, and we could put out like a pretty polished product as a result of that. But you also asked about tools.
Yeah, any kind of software, any tools?
There's two tools
out
I really love that we use a lot. One of them is called Appsy. It lets you record a user session, and then you can play it back like a video. You can see what they tapped on, what they didn't. We do this for all of our releases. We tag them by like what feature did the user use, what experiment were they in, and we watch these videos as a team pretty regularly. It helps everyone on the team get a pretty good sense of how are people actually using a thing. Like where are they getting confused? What are they tapping on that we didn't expect them to, or what are they trying to do that we just had never imagined? So it's really good for qualitative feedback. And then for quantitative stuff, we use this tool called Amplitude, which is, I guess, like what Mixpanel was at some point, but just way more powerful. It's like the product I'm most impressed with. Like they release new features all the time that are exceptionally helpful. It lets the non-engineers on our team dive into like any of our data in depth, and it's just extremely powerful. So everyone on our team can make a really good dashboard on anything that's happening in the app. Those are like two favorite tools.
And how do you make sure that the feedback translates into the product itself? Is there a process for that?
We're a really small team, so it's the product team that ends up looking at it. I mean, anytime we put something out, the next few days on the engineering side are about cleaning up like any technical debt or fixing bugs, and on the product side, it's entirely about watching users use the product, either through Appsy or Amplitude or more user tests. So we try really hard to get as much feedback as we can.
Yeah.
APPSEE. That's great.
That's great. And I guess the other question is, how do you find those customers? Because obviously it's a very specialized set of users to begin with.
Yeah.
Are there any strategies you've employed?
Yeah. Okay, so one thing we learned really early on is most press is not valuable at all for us because none of our audience is reading any of those things. They're high school kids. So we learned very early that Snapchat is huge. Like every single person in our audience is on Snapchat. We got very lucky early on. Somebody put us in one of the Daily Mail Snapchat Discover stories. We're like the 30th story of the day. And that was like the biggest traffic bump we could have imagined. So Snapchat has been huge, and we've invested a lot in getting to know publications that are on Snapchat Discover. Mixed results, but when it works really, really well. The main ways we've gotten users, kids are going to the App Store and looking for like homework app. And there's very few good products in that space. So like from the very beginning, we were pretty high in those results. Like we're probably the #1 app for homework and the top few for math. So that's been a great source of early users. And then having a really impressive demo is always amazing. I wish we were set up to show it. Basically, you take a picture of a question, and it teaches you how to answer it.
It's on the store, so
yeah, in like
Socratic.
less than a second, which is a really impressive demo. So kids would use it and be like, "I cannot believe this exists," and show their friends. And so word of mouth has been huge for us.
Yeah, it is incredible. And obviously, one of the ways to distribute it is through stores, whether it's Google Play Store or Apple's App Store or other places. Maybe you have some tips on founders here, how to get to those teams and companies, and what's the way to forge relationships to capitalize on them.
So the first part of it, unfortunately, I don't have a great answer. What we did was used our networks, which you can develop and work on, like find people who have been featured. And so what happened for Apple for us was a really good friend of mine has an app that is constantly featured in education. So we asked her, would you be willing to tell your contact about us to see if they're interested in talking to us? And thankfully they were interested, so that's how we got introduced to them. But from that moment, it was a very long process before anything happened. We met with them, we showed them our roadmap, we told them what we care about, we got design feedback from them, we incorporated that design feedback. So we actually made a bunch of changes, not all the changes they expected or hoped for, but a lot of changes that made our app better for Apple without making it any worse for our users, actually better for our users as well. So we invested like 6 months of getting to know them, talking to them, and making changes to our app and like showing them what we were up to before we ever got featured. And I think the mistake we made was somehow imagining that that would happen faster. So when we were making our Android app, when we got introduced to Google, this was through an investor who decided not to invest in us but liked us enough to make the introduction. Then our expectations were very different. We knew that it was going to be a bunch of work, and it's not like it's a one-way conversation. Like we're both trying to get something out of it. It's like, what can we do together that'll be best for both of us? Yeah, you got to invest in it.
Great. Speaking of investors, any tips on how to approach that, and maybe give a little background of how much money you guys raised, how many rounds, who invested if it's public, and how to approach fundraising as a startup? Sure.
It's a very big topic, and I'm still learning a lot about it. But we've raised $7.5 million. We raised a seed round of $1.5 million from Spark, mainly from Spark and small amounts from BetaWorks and Andreessen. Then we raised a Series A few years later from Spark and Shasta, and that was $6 million. Okay, so I feel like a lot of things in the world are centered around storytelling, and getting VC money is very much, like there's a big storytelling component. And being able to tell a good story succinctly that has like clear value in it is hard. I'm trying to do that right now, it's hard. So yeah, I mean, I guess like know your story really well, like who's using it? Why does it need to exist? Why would people use it over competitors? Like there's a bunch of very basic but hard questions that it does take a lot of work to get to like a succinct like truth that other people will hear and believe. So yeah, just invest in storytelling. We've done a lot of like group pitches to our friends, to our employees, to parents, or like as many people as possible. Ideally, people who are in the space so they can give you good feedback. So parents are actually not the best. They're going to be too nice. Get feedback from people that aren't going to be nice, that'll be honest with you, that what you're saying doesn't make any sense and there's no reason that they would ever use it. And that's pretty important. Just like getting honest feedback is hard, but important. And then something I underappreciated early on, also I didn't learn at Venmo because Venmo has never made money, surprise, is to think about the business part of it. Like we did not think about marketing early on. We also didn't think about business until much later. Like, who's going to pay for this and why? And why are they going to pay for this over the slightly worse free alternative? I just like have those hard questions, like have a really short, clear answer to those hard questions. I think that's a really good place to start.
And were there any specific metrics investors were looking at, whether it's in pre-launch phase or post-launch? I'm sure they probably differed along the journey.
Pre-launch, it was very much about trusting that my partner and I and our team could execute. Post-launch, it's very much about engagement. Post-launch, pre-revenue, it's very much about engagement and retention. Like, do people actually value this product? Are they going to keep coming back? Are they actually using it week after week? That's been extremely important. And we don't make money yet, but that's going to, at some point, feel like everything is a proxy metric except for revenue when you're running a business. And once we get to that stage, that's going to be the main thing that they're going to care about.
Nice, that's awesome. And I think we have only a few minutes left, but if you had to go back to your younger self living in Indonesia, you know, Shreyans, a child in Jakarta, what's your advice for yourself, for the future self about entrepreneurship, starting a company, you know, traveling internationally, doing things that you've never imagined before? Because
something I've historically underappreciated and I'm learning about now is really, like what I said at the beginning, is it's all about the people around you. Like, the people around you will shape everything that you know about the world. They're going to open up doors for you. They're going to teach you a lot of things. And there have been a few people in my life that have made a massive difference in how it's turned out. And so just find the greatest, coolest, funniest, whatever that you're drawn to. Like, find the best people you can in that world, and they're going to just change everything. That's my only advice.
Awesome. Yeah. Be nice to people, I guess.
Yeah.
That's the message. I think that's almost it, right? Any time for questions?
Nope.
Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
Oh, I saw her first.
How did you meet your investors? I mean, at a restaurant?
How do we meet our investors?
Yeah.
We met them through other entrepreneurs. So, like, a great way to meet an investor is find somebody who has raised money before and get an introduction to their investors. In order to do that, you have to convince them that it's going to be worth it. It's not going to be too much of a cost for them. But we've met a lot of our early investors through friends who had raised money from them. Sorry, just a follow-up and then, yeah.
So I'm a student, so I don't really have like connection.
Yeah.
So in this situation, how I can meet my investors if I want to start?
That's a good question, and I don't have an answer to that because I only really know about my experience, which is a disappointing answer, but that's the truth. Sorry, that guy over there.
Last question.
How far are you from doing exactly like the same value add that you're giving to high school kids, doing that through voice, like so people can just ask any question and then get the answer back, something for the smart speakers? Or
that's a really good question. Voice, I'm sure, is going to be a massive input source. We haven't thought about it very much because there are so many other problems we have to deal with before we get to that point. We did get some voice input through the keyboard, but not directly voice yet. But sorry, I don't have a great answer.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you.